If everyone knew this word, I think we would give mothers so much more grace and space.
You describe in those first weeks Googling a lot. It does feel like a lot of the preparation in this country, a lot of those sort of NCT classes, a lot of it's about the process of giving birth. Not so much on what you do for those first few weeks when there's the baby all the time. I mean, what was going through your head at that point? How did it feel?
I genuinely felt like I wasn't cut out for it, perhaps, or that I was failing, because whenever I would speak to other mothers, I think there's such a fear, isn't there, that having children is such a privilege and not afforded to everyone who desperately wants it. And so I think there's such a fear of saying those words out loud, that this is hard. I think that whenever I would even tiptoe into that territory, it never felt like that was going to be accepted. So I turned first to parenting books, but often what I found there were just more reasons to feel guilty, I was failing. I remember one, and I opened it, desperate one afternoon, and there was like a double-page spread, and it was trying to describe like the exact pitch and cadence of a baby's cry and what it meant. And I remember this sentence, and it said, a great parent can always decipher what a baby's cry means. And I burst into tears, because to me, all the cries sounded the same. Luckily, there was a part of me that thought, this isn't helping me. And I threw all those parenting books away.
What did you replace them with?
So I started to read about self-compassion. I started to understand about the inner critic. I started to understand it gets louder the more that you care. So actually, the fact that my critic was so loud was a sign of how much I was caring. I started to understand about generational patterns and about trauma and about how things get passed down in your cellular memory. I started to learn about how motherhood is actually a rite of passage that is supposed to change you, and how it is supposed to confront you with maybe some of the behaviors that aren't serving you anymore, like, with me, the critic and the guilt and the perfectionism and the controlling. And I started to get this idea, maybe this is about a kind of evolution of who I am, and maybe I'm not failing. Maybe I'm doing this exactly as it's meant to be. It's just not spoken about in this way in our Western culture. So that was absolutely pivotal, seas parting moment for me, because I started to go from feeling like I was failing and not cut out for this to actually quite empowered, and that the most important thing isn't actually how you feed or how you wean or whether you co-sleep. The most important thing is how regulated I was as a parent. Because the moment I would calm myself, I talk about this in the introduction of the book, the moment I would calm myself, my baby would calm. And I learned about mirror neurons, which is why that happens. And it was night and day, to be honest with you. It's completely changed everything.
You also talk really interestingly about what actually happens to women when they become mothers, which feels like isn't really talked about much. Just tell us about the science of the transition.
So the word is called matrescence.
Now, you see, that's a word that most people haven't even heard of. And there are an awful lot of mothers when this is not talked about.
That's right. And I went onto the streets of London last month or a couple of months ago, and I held up a sign saying the word. And the first thing I said is, can anyone say this word? Because it's actually quite a hard word to say. And most people can't say it.
I debated it a bit before trying it.
Most people do. And then the second question I said was, do you know what it means? And not one person, we asked hundreds, busy Covent Garden lunchtime, not one person knew what it meant. So what matrescence is it's an anthropological term, exactly the same as adolescence. So if you went onto a street holding a sign that said adolescence, everyone would tell you what it was. It's that time when you go from being a teen to an adult. Everybody understands it's a time when your identity changes, your body changes, your hormone changes, your values change, your relationship changes. You're trying to figure out who you are. It's a real time of transformation and growth. Well, matrescence is exactly the same process that describes the becoming of a mother, when your body changes, your hormones change, your values change, your relationship changes. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is because whenever I tell a mother that word, I literally see their shoulders drop. Often tears come because so many people felt like I did, like they were doing it wrong. And actually you're doing it right. It's meant to be a process that takes time. The analogy that I use is one of a jigsaw, where you kind of have a jigsaw picture of who you are and how your life works and what's important to you. And then becoming a mother is like throwing those pieces up in the air. And then piece by piece, you put them back together, and many don't fit anymore, like maybe your work or your relationship or your friendships or how you used to dress, or, it can be anything in your life. And it takes time to slowly put that jigsaw puzzle back together. And it's ever changing, that picture as well, I think, as our children go through different ages and stages. So yeah, it was completely life-changing. And I think if more mothers and those who care for us, love us, employ us, if everyone knew this word, I think we would give mothers so much more grace and space. And I think mothers would completely change how they relate to themselves through that period.
Motherhood is nothing new. It's gone on for millennia. Our mothers, grandmothers, great-great-great-grandmothers all went through it. So why is it that in the modern world, with all the progress of modern science, most women still give birth without understanding the transformation that they're about to undergo? It's something that Zoe is trying to fix. The story today: we need to talk about what motherhood does to women. I'm Manveen Rana from The Story, a daily news podcast from The Times. Join me and my co-host Luke Jones for a deep dive into the big stories and investigations. Plus, each month, William Hague hosts an agenda-setting interview with a key newsmaker or big thinker. That's The Story, The Times daily podcast that brings you one remarkable story told in depth. Listen every weekday on The Times radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.